You should never follow circus music. My great grandmother, Granny Connolly, had a strange phobia. She was afraid of circuses, not just clowns. She was terrified of the concept of circuses as a whole: the big tent, the ringmaster, the aerobatics, the music, especially the music. Whether it was on TV or a poster for the circus, or even just mentioning the word, it was enough to send her into hysterics. I don't just mean a panic attack, I mean hysterical sobs, cries of anguish, and it was honestly terrifying to witness as a kid. In our family, you learnt pretty quickly not to mention circuses around Granny Connolly. It just became one of those things. Family quirks, you know. Don't mention circuses, and don't ask why. Myself, my siblings, and cousins all knew that there was a story behind it. However, it was one of those stories which our parents refused to tell any of us. And even more annoyingly, when the older cousins were told it, they refused to tell us too. Finally, one evening, we decided to just ask and risk the consequences. It was a family party for one of my great uncles, and while the adults were in the kitchen fetching drinks and salad, or were outside with the barbecue, we took our chance. Granny Connolly was sitting in her chair in the living room, and since I had lost the draw, I was the one who asked her, "Granny, why are you afraid of circuses?" Immediately, her brown eyes filled with tears, but instead of her usual hysterics, she gestured for us to sit down. We all sat on the sofa or on the floor as she told us her story. When she was a child, at the beginning of the 1900s, her family was quite poor. They had a small farm, and she and her siblings lent a hand wherever they could. They lived on the outskirts of a small village near the coast of Launay, where nothing really happened. It was a quiet life, a peaceful life, and then one day, it happened. The circus arrived at the village, literally overnight. Dozens of tents, including the stripy big top, sprang up. There were trailers, cages of animals, music echoed across the hills, and the village was awash with excitement and questions. Where had the circus come from? Why was it here? Nobody knew. Some of the men from the village went to ask, but returned with the most exciting news. The circus was to perform a special show for the village children. Best of all, children under 10 went for free. Any older children had to pay half a penny. For most of the villagers, it seemed perfect, a chance for the children to see a circus, something none of them had seen before, and a chance for the parents to get the children out from under their feet. However, my great-great-grandparents disagreed. Both Granny Connolly and her older brother Sean were older than 10, and although it would have been free for her siblings, my great-great-grandparents could not spare a literal penny for them to go to the circus, and there was no way they would let the little ones go by themselves. The little ones cried as they heard the music playing across the fields, tempting them, calling them to come and see the wonders of the show. So Granny Connolly and Sean hatched a plan. One of them would claim to take the little ones for a walk and slip into the crowd of children going to the circus. The other would stay at home to cover for them. Granny Connolly lost, so had to stand by the fence and watch as Sean and the younger siblings, Mary, John, and little Anne, headed towards the circus. She could hear the music as they walked down the path, Mary holding John's hand, little Anne in Sean's arms. They never came home. As night drew in, the villagers realized that their children had never come home. Even more horrifying was the absence of the music. The music, which had sounded across the village all day, had stopped. From the village square, they could see that the field where the circus tent had stood was empty. There was not a trace of the circus, not the tents, nor the animals, and especially not the children. The entire county searched for miles around, in all four corners of Ireland. They searched for weeks, unable to understand or explain how a circus and the village's children vanished into thin air. The circus never appeared in another town or village, and not one of the children has ever been seen again. Ever since that day, Granny Connolly carried the guilt of being the only child left, not just in her family, but her entire village. Ever since that day, she still heard the music. Whenever she saw a circus or a clown or even heard the words, the music grew louder. It never stopped. After Granny Connolly told us her story, my siblings and cousins were slightly skeptical, but none of us dared to question Granny Connolly, and admittedly, it corroborated the story that our older siblings and cousins confirmed us. They'd been told the same story, the exact same story. I, however, was slightly more skeptical than my cousins and decided to do some research. To me, it sounded too similar to the story of the Pied Piper taking away the children of Haymoon. However, my research revealed not only news articles from that time about the missing children, but my dad and I were driving through her village one day, and we saw a memorial that was erected in her village square for the souls of the lost children who went to a circus and never returned. I began to believe it, not just because the evidence was overwhelming, but for another reason too. Ever since Granny Connolly told us her story, I've been hearing circus music. Not all the time, just every now and then. I hear it, and I'm tempted to follow it. Almost. But I don't, because you should never follow circus music.